Jonathan, can you tell us how did you get into crypto space and Regtech?
No, absolutely, Brianna. So Hackers and Founders was really this grassroots community of entrepreneurs that ended up exploding and going viral globally. And we ended up hearing the problems of thousands of entrepreneurs as they were trying to raise capital, move to Silicon Valley. How do I get capital to build my business? And it was really looking at that ended up, we submitted 80 pages of comments to the SEC on crowdfunding on the Jobs Act a number of years ago through a law school that I advise here in Silicon Valley. And then through that, I was invited to join an advisory committee at the SEC, looking at why so much capital gets concentrated on the coasts and why so little capital in the United States gets invested in middle America. And it was really that experience at the SEC and doing a deep dive on those issues, which led me to crypto to actually try to fix some of the structural problems that I think that we actually have in terms of how small businesses can raise money and get money to create jobs and grow their economy.
So you come, I assume you come from an engineering background, which you mentioned in our off-recording conversations. How did you get into advising SEC?
So it was literally, I've come to learn that legal code is like code. The machine isn't a computer that the software code runs, the machine is the government. And it was really taking a long, hard look at what are the structural problems, like why can't I just send out an email to all of my friends and neighbors and say, hey, I'm starting a business. Do you guys want to invest in my business? Why is it so hard to get in front of wealthy people to actually raise money from them? How do those wealthy people make money investing into technology companies or small businesses? And it was looking at all of those problems that led me to believe that I think we actually have just some structural problems, some structural challenges in how we actually raise money and how small businesses can raise money. And it was really looking at my friends, the challenges that they had, and trying to fix the problems of my friends that led me into this Regtech space. I'm sick of seeing brilliant entrepreneurs not being able to raise money for their great ideas.
That's so true. So could you share 5 ways that Regtech can help stabilize the crypto markets?
No, absolutely. I mean, I'm a very firm believer that good regulations make for good markets. I think if you have a market that's just kind of wanton, people can do whatever, whatever in the world you want, you end up getting a lot of fraud, you end up getting a lot of lying and cheating and stealing. And if you actually look to 100 years ago, before we actually had the SEC, it really was kind of a Wild West in terms of stock markets.
Right.
You had all of these people, lying to small businesses, farmers in the middle of the country who didn't have access to the stock exchange in New York. And it was really at the basis of that you ended up having a lot of fraud. And a lot of that sort of stuff led to the Great Depression. So the SEC came about, we passed a bunch of laws, the 1933 Act, the 34 Act, the 40 Act, to actually establish rules around how we sell securities. In the last 2 years, a lot of people have looked at crypto and blockchain and said, oh my gosh, I don't have to follow any rules because this is unregulated.
Right.
And that has really been wrong.
Right.
The US government has indeed says, you know what, no, a lot of these laws that we've created apply. And we don't think that this is all of that new. Yes, there are some new things to this because it's online and it's across borders. But these rules do actually matter, and you do need to actually follow these rules. And I'm actually interested in how do we actually bridge kind of this older world, this older world of kind of traditional finance with this new world of kind of internet-based value, internet-based finance that is coming. And it's going to be messy. I think it has been messy. I think in the last few months, we've started to see some more regulatory certainty. and a lot less hubris in the market because the regulators have been saying, no, you need to follow these rules. And I think that will eventually make this into a great, solid industry that actually has rules where investors know that they will have protections, and that they can actually trust this asset class as the asset class starts to grow.
So what are some of the ways you think that crypto firms can do to maintain a competitive advantage or an edge in this market?
The challenge right now is that the United States actually has some very restrictive, restrictive laws. They've taken a very kind of firm attitude. I mean, the U.S. securities industry is at least $14 trillion a year. And so you have a lot of established entrenched players that aren't really interested in innovating quickly. You have a lot of smaller countries that are rapidly building frameworks, regulatory frameworks, to actually make this a lot more appealing and attract a lot more investment. And so you see countries like Gibraltar, Malta, Bermuda, the Cayman Islands, who can actually be more flexible, who can be more startup-y, and they can actually build rules and regulations and collaborate a lot closer with startups in this market. You're also starting to see the UK. They created a regulatory sandbox for blockchain applications. We have some friends and partners who have actually been approved for that. And I think the UK is also taking a long, hard look at it. Tokyo and Japan have actually been pretty aggressively moving forward in terms of blockchain and cryptocurrency regulation. They've had some fits and starts. But what can entrepreneurs do in this space? Honestly, it's probably not be in the United States right now, or if you're in the United States, you're just going to have to be very careful to actually follow the rules. We're here, but our offices are essentially, we're a multinational corporation. We have offices in multiple different countries. We just have a subsidiary office here, and all of our HQ and all of that sort of stuff is actually based offshore. Our assets are offshore, our investors are offshore. We're not raising money from US investors, that sort of stuff, just to be sure that we're following the letter of the law on that.
And can you share examples that you take to prevent internal data breaches? Because we hear a lot of incidents where internal employees have access to the wallets or assets that causes issues sometimes. So what are some of the internal measures you've taken for this type of situations?
So the internal measures are the computer that actually connects to our wallets doesn't touch the internet except when it really needs to. We have a multi-sig wallet, meaning there's 2 or 3 of us that actually have to sign off on any transaction before a transaction can actually happen. We have 2-factor authentication for every transaction or every login, email, what have you, that we're actually using. It's a pain in the butt. It slows things down, but at the same time, you just kind of got to do what you got to do to protect your investors.
Right.
And we're also using very strong passwords, 20 characters or more. We're using a password manager to be able to manage that. And we're also constantly looking at service providers that are also for our investors. For instance, we're in talks right now with Coinbase about using their institutional investor product for people investing $1 million or more into our fund, so that they could actually work with Coinbase and have their stock as well as their money actually at Coinbase and held with them in terms of their cold storage, instead of just relying on us and building all that expertise internally.
Okay, no, that's great. And are there any specific policies and procedures or any type of frameworks that you think are really important for any firm in this business to have?
In terms of policies and procedures and frameworks, yes, you need to get comfortable with securities law in the United States. You really do need to, because the SEC has come up and said, 99.5% of all ICOs are securities. So you need to get very familiar with securities laws.
Right.
I think entrepreneurs in this space need to also start to pay attention to money transfer laws. Um, so, for instance, FinCEN, which is a network for financial crimes enforcement, they have actually said that if the token that you're issuing is not a security, then they consider you to be regulated by FinCEN, which means you need a money transfer license in 58 different legal jurisdictions across the US and territories, and it's about $1 million per jurisdiction. So if you're not a security, FinCEN says, okay, you're money and you need a license from us, which is $60 million. The last bit that I really think, no matter where you're at in the world, I think any entrepreneur in this space needs to do KYC and AML,
Right.
which is called Know Your Customer and anti-money laundering checks. Banks have to do this. They have to know who's actually depositing money at a bank, who's investing in your account, and then they have to be sure that this money isn't, being used to launder money. So we're using, for instance, a couple of APIs, one from Onfido, a UK company, to do KYC. So we have to get a photo ID and an ID, compare the two, and say this is truly who is actually applying. And then we actually check their account using another API to see if we think that they're actually laundering money, and we come back with a confidence score based on that, using another API called CoinFirm. And so it's the KYC AML rules, no matter where you're at. I pretty much think the FBI has very, very long arms. A lot of governments are upset about terrorism, and crypto, for good or for ill, has gotten a reputation.
Right.
I think it's misplaced, but they've gotten a reputation for being a great place to launder money or to finance terrorism. I think it's a terrible technology to launder money with, because you have a ledger, a receipt of every transaction that you've ever done.
Yes, exactly.
On this, but you have to actually follow the KYC and AML rules. Otherwise, you're just going to get spanked by some government at some point in time, and they take a very dim view of that. You can go to jail for that.
Right. So if done in the right way, blockchain could help actually to combat fraud because of the technology that it has.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that,
because everything's traceable.
Yeah, every transaction that you have done is on a ledger that's copied across 35 million computers. Like, I have a receipt of every transaction that's distributed across millions of computers. And so
you cannot undo what has been done in the past, right?
Absolutely. You can't go back and tamper with it. Otherwise, the receipt just disintegrates. It falls apart. So you have a tamper-proof or tamper-evident technology that's copied across millions of computers. So you actually have way more financial transparency than you do in traditional banking.
Right.
You actually have way more accountability than you do in traditional banking, or the traditional financial services infrastructure. So I think that this is a key technology to use to combat fraud, especially in emerging markets. Fraud, corruption, money laundering, that sort of stuff. I think you're going to see a lot of emerging markets start to use these technologies as a tool to fight these problems.
So shifting gears a little bit on you, what are some of the things that you do on a daily basis, regardless of how busy you are?
What do I do on a daily basis, regardless of how busy I am?
Yeah, just to maintain a balance, because when you're an entrepreneur, you're looking at the business from all angles, and there's some people follow certain things to do those things no matter what. So what are some of the things that you do on a daily basis?
I generally read about an hour or two, pretty much every single day. I'm pretty insanely curious. I generally have a class from Audible that I'm listening to, just on some topic or another. Like, for instance, I've been on a kick looking at the history of colonialism, both in the Americas as well as British colonialism.
Interesting.
Actually, it's in terms of financial markets, I didn't expect this, but in terms of financial markets, the countries that were colonized by the UK tend to have much more of a commercial kind of colonization because it was the East Indies Trading Company.
Yeah.
As opposed to countries that were colonized by Spain, it was a king and queen that were colonizing, and so they actually just sucked money out, and there wasn't a whole lot of business. So you don't have stock markets, for instance, or good stock markets in countries that were colonized by Spain and Portugal, where you have much better stock markets in countries that were colonized by the UK. I think colonialism was awful regardless, but it's kind of the legacy of these that when you actually started looking at global financial systems, and this was a surprise to me, that this, I think, is actually one of the key side effects of the types of colonialism that people happened. So I find reading all sorts of kind of different stuff often informs what it is that I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
I generally every day play some video games just to kind of unwind a little bit. Whether it's 10 or 15 minutes here or there, just to kind of get a little moment of zen. And then I also try very hard to separate and spend time with family. Make sure that you focus on that, because this is kind of a 24/7 business, and you really need efforts to separate business from family life. And I'm sometimes successful and sometimes not, but that's the challenge.
We try our best.
Exactly.
So what are the top 3 conferences you're attending or excited about?
So the next conference that I'm actually excited about is next week. I'm going to a conference called HoshoCon. Mm-hmm. It's one of the first information security conferences in the blockchain space. It's in Las Vegas next week. Mm-hmm. I will be speaking on securities law for hackers. I'm very, very much looking for that. How do you explain the legal code into kind of software code so that people can kind of understand a little bit more? I have been asked to speak at Oxford in the UK in November at a conference talking about blockchain and regulation. I'm very excited about that one. And then I really want to go to Davos one of these days. I haven't gotten an invitation. If anybody wants to invite me, I'd be happy to go. But that's kind of a bucket list sort of thing.
And to sum it up, lastly, what is your favorite life lesson quote?
My favorite life lesson quote. So before I went into software engineering, I was a nurse for 20 years. So I have a strange background. And one of the things when I was working as an emergency room nurse that I was taught early on, that I taught to a lot of other nurses, is whose emergency is it? You walk into the room and the patient's really, really sick. Whose emergency is it? Well, it's mine. I have to fix something. No. It's their emergency room. Your job is to keep a little bit of zen, a little bit of calm, so that you can actually do the right thing. In the ups and downs of entrepreneurship, it's been surprising how many times I've had to say, okay, wait, this is not my emergency. I need to settle down. Let's just calmly try to fix the problem in front of us. We'll get through this. Because there's a lot of ups and downs as an entrepreneur. So whose emergency is it? Not mine. Strange, but true. I use it all the time.
No, that's fantastic, and it's so true. I'll try to implement that as well. Paul, it's a pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much for your time today.
Absolutely, my pleasure, and thanks for actually having me.
All right, take care.